The biggest strengths of this Chicago Bears roster are at receiver and defensive back. And when you have two talented veteran groups going head-to-head at practice, it pushes them both to be that much better.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On the show today, we look at where the Bears are specifically pushing each other to be better. Like, of course, everyone's pushing each other to be better, but when these receivers and defensive backs go head-to-head, when you have guys as talented and experienced as Keenan Allen and Jalen Johnson and DJ Moore, and then like young, super talented players like Tyreek Stevenson and Rome Odunze, those combinations going head-to-head day after day can push each other even farther and grow their game more so than going against an opponent who, you know, might not be all that savvy or might not have that much experience or just might not be so, supremely talented at their craft that like they're doing their job, but they're not doing anything above and beyond to really test you in a lot of the same ways that someone like Jalen Johnson or Keenan Allen can. So first we'll hear from Kyler Gordon about what he's learning going up against Keenan Allen in practice and some of the specific things Allen does that pushes Gordon to be better and change how he covers wide receivers. Then we will hear from Matt Eberflus about some of the progress that Rome Odunze is making at practice going up against these Bears cornerbacks. And we'll wrap up with some thoughts from Keenan Allen about chemistry at the wide receiver position and what it means for guys like DJ Moore and Rome Odunze and Keenan to build that against these defensive backs and how that manifests itself in this Chicago Bears offense. It's sort of a given that good players going up against good players can only push those good players to be better. And I'm glad that OTAs and minicamp are done because I'm very, very tired of the cliche that I think I've heard every Bears media person use in a press conference up to this point, saying iron sharpens iron. I promise I'm not going to use that phrase any more than just the one time I said it there to point out that it's very tired and unoriginal and overused. But it's also true, right? I mean, most cliches like that have some truth behind them that, yes, when really good players go head-to-head, it makes them both better. And so for a lot of these Bears, for all the Bears defensive backs, like they haven't practiced against Keenan Allen before this. Maybe they're a little used to what DJ Moore does, but Keenan Allen is a brand new veteran threat that they've hardly even faced in their NFL careers. I mean, I don't think any of the young Bears have faced him because it's been a couple seasons since the Chargers played the Bears, but like this is a new kind of threat that they can work against every single day at practice and see all of the nuances that Keenan Allen applies to his game that are just going to be a little different than what DJ Moore does and certainly different from Rome Odunze or any of the rest of the wide receiver core. And I thought Kyler Gordon did a good job of illustrating what that looks like for him in that really key slot matchup when Allen's in the slot and Kyler Gordon is across from him.
Watching you and Keenan in the slot is like iron sharpening iron. What do you think you can learn just having that matchup when he does come in the slot on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. For me, with him, already so far, like, I feel like for him, he's going to keep me disciplined and stuff like that. So, he's a quick twitch dude as well. I got a really good release and get off and stuff like that. So, for me, staying disciplined the whole entire time. Another thing for him, he's very efficient with his steps that he takes, doing what he does. And so, for me, that makes me have to be even more efficient with my steps and not take as many or just be smooth or come out the break right, read it right. Versus the stem or whatever it might be. So I'm excited to keep battling him and keep getting better with him. Yeah.
Kyler Gordon is just one example there, but it's true for all the cornerbacks on the Bears, right? We also heard Jalen Johnson said some similar things, but without as much, I think, of the depth of the specifics there that Kyler Gordon got into, that there's a savviness to the way Keenan Allen runs routes to how he uses his footwork and his head and his eyes and his hands to set up the cornerback and not give away what he's doing and be extremely efficient in all of his movements so that if you're not reacting perfectly as a corner, if you second guess or you hesitate or you just take too many steps in trying to change directions, like Keenan Allen is going to be able to separate from you. He's going to take every inch and every millisecond of space that you're willing to give him on the field. Because that's the other thing about this is this all happens so rapidly. Like it's very much minutia. It's very much, an extra step here that, that the corner had to take an extra step here to slow down or turn around that Keenan didn't have to take. And one step covers what? I don't know, like 2 feet of physical space on the field, which elapses 0.1 second of time. And how long did it take you to take one step in a run, right? Like less than half a second, right? We're talking about such a fraction of a moment and a fraction of a space on the field. But when the ball is already coming out and it's right on the drop of the quarterback at a specific depth at the end of the stem, like that 1 or 2 steps that takes less than a half a second can be the difference between an open, easy completion for Caleb Williams and a difficult tight window throw, or worse, a pass breakup or an interception or something like that. Like being able to perfect that and have the receiver be perfect on that and to not waste movement and to not give the cornerback any inclination of where he's going to go. Some receivers have little tells that, okay, like on routes where they're going to break to the middle of the field, maybe they'll start to lean just a little bit of their torso one direction, or something in their hips or their hands will kind of signal to the DB that, hey, I've seen him do this on tape. And that he doesn't, the wide receiver doesn't realize he's doing it. It's like a pitcher tipping pitches, right? Like they don't necessarily realize that they're giving it away, but something in the way they run their route is telling me where their route is going to go. But that's not Keenan Allen. And so it tests Kyler Gordon in the slot or Jalen Johnson or Tyreek Stevenson on the outside to be on top of their game and like paying attention to every detail. And then going back through the film and saying, I took too many steps here, or I took the wrong angle here, or I misjudged his stem there, as opposed to practicing against any other wide receiver who might still going to run decent routes and stuff. Whether you're practicing against Dante Pettis or Tyler Scott or Colin Johnson or whoever, like, sure, they're going to run the correct routes still, but it's all those little things. Like I said, the step or the half second difference that can be Keenan Allen running a great route that's challenging for the corner versus an average wide receiver running an average route that against certain coverages will still get open, but isn't necessarily testing the defensive back in quite the same way. And so that's where Keenan Allen's value to the defense really manifests itself at practice. Also quite valuable for Rome Odunze to have Keenan Allen there to learn from, but also Odunze is talented himself and has a pretty dynamic skill set to test this defense in some different ways. So up next, we'll hear from head coach Matt Eberflus about the progress he's seeing from Rome Odunze and the approach Odunze is taking towards getting better and learning from Keenan Allen and the defense that he's practicing against. Keep it locked right here on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. Concerts, comedy shows, theater shows, Bears games, any sports, you name it. If there's a live event in your area, they've got it at Gametime. I personally use Gametime all the time. I just went to see T-Pain with tickets that I got on Gametime. It was a really great concert, some other great acts opening for him, and man, I had a lot of fun there. And the nice thing about Gametime is not only do they have last-minute deals, so you can save on buying tickets at the very last moment for your favorite event, but you can also see your view from your seat, and they've got all-in pricing, so you know exactly how much you're going to pay, and there's not going to be any added fees that get bumped up the price of your ticket at the very end, and it costs way more than you thought it would. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So much of the attention this offseason has been on Caleb Williams, for good reason. He's the one everyone's excited about as the number one overall pick. And I feel like it's allowed Rome Odunze to not fly under the radar per se, but I'll get a lot less attention. Like if the Bears hadn't had the number 1 overall pick and just had the 9th pick and drafted Rome Odunze, a lot of the talk at training camp would be, how is this young receiver doing? But now it's a little bit less of the spotlight, which is good for him to be able to just kind of work and grow and develop along that way without too much extra scrutiny or attention. But along the way, he's really been impressing teammates and coaches. Opposing defensive backs, Jalen Johnson spoke highly of what he's been able to do so far. Some of the other cornerbacks have certainly been impressed by Rome Odunze, and his fellow wide receivers are seeing him come along quickly and strong. And I think for Rome, right, we know he can do a little bit of everything. He's big enough, he's fast, he's strong, wins contested catches, is a good route runner, is explosive, makes plays after the catch. So for him, the big thing has just been adjusting to the Bears offense, adjusting to the NFL, how the Bears want certain routes run, what they call certain routes, where he's supposed to line up on certain plays. And with every rookie, just like we talked about yesterday with Caleb Williams and trying to get his cadence a little bit more consistent for this offense and some false starts and other things happening in that process, Rome is going to have those too, where he lines up in the wrong spot sometimes early on, or runs the wrong route, or runs the right route but to the wrong depth. Little things like that are always going to be a part of this process. But he's really approaching this from a very veteran-like mindset and practices here in terms of like what he is doing for himself. I do wonder like if he got some good advice from Keenan Allen or from somebody else about how to approach this. But Matt Eberflus outlined some of the good things he's seeing from Rome Odunze, and especially like how Odunze is preparing himself in a way that most other rookies don't go fully to this extent the way that Rome does.
How's Rome progressing? What are you seeing as far as signs for him that he's catching on?
Yeah, he's much in the same category as all the rookies, as Caleb and all the guys. He's learning the concepts, understanding where it is. And I just asked him today, I said, what's your process, for summer in terms of learning and keep that beginner's mindset? What are you going to do? And I asked him during stretch, and he was like, well, I like to do, because they get the plays, of course, and they look at the play and then they draw the play. But he likes to actually go on the field, and to recite the play and then put himself in the position, in the motion, and then run the route as part of his conditioning. So I think that's a good way for him, and I think that was really mature on his part to be able to actually, discern and understand how he learns best. And the part about being a good learner is knowing how you learn best, and I think that he knows himself really well. Very mature for his age. He's a wonderful teammate, and he's going to be exciting to watch.
How accurate are his routes so far? What are you seeing as far as where he needs to be?
I think pretty good for where he is in terms of the process of this. Only having so many reps, I think it's really good. I think it's almost exceptional, because he's really doing a good job with a lot of things, and we're putting him in different positions, and he's moving around. And sure, he has the oh shoot, I'm on this side, I should be on that side. That's all learning process, but he'll get that.
The thoroughness that Eberflus described there for Odunze's like conditioning preparation, right? That when he's going out there for conditioning, he's calling out the play for himself, going up and lining up where he's supposed to on that play, and then running that route. Like that feels like a very like veteran style way of like, I wouldn't expect a rookie receiver to come in and think to do that or know to do that, right? Like that feels like something that a veteran player, and maybe it was a player in college, an older player, but like that feels like something that somebody would have taught to him along the way. And I imagine if I'm Rome Odunze, I feel a little bit of, I don't want to say extra pressure, because there's always pressure in the NFL, but like I just wonder if being at practice every day and seeing the ahead of you on the depth chart are DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, 2,000-yard receivers, 2 Pro Bowl wide receivers, 2 guys that are at the peaks of their games right now, playing NFL wide receiver at an extremely high level. If that just doesn't push him so much further and harder than he might be, if he had come on a team where maybe he's the number 1 wide receiver, and I don't mean that this is not any kind of specific shot at Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, but like right, Neighbors goes to the Giants, and he's kind of like the big man on campus there at wide receiver. They got Darius Slayton, and they drafted Wan'Dale Robinson. I guess they did sign Allen Robinson, but he's been kind of, past his prime a little bit there. Like he's the guy there. In Arizona, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the guy there. They got Michael Wilson last year out of Stanford. Greg Dortch is kind of a good underrated player for them, but like number 1 receiver there is Marvin Harrison. So it might be easier to be guys in that situation again, I'm not talking about them specifically, but to be in that kind of situation and say, I'm already the best wide receiver here. Like, I just got to do my thing, and I already run good routes, and I'm still going to work on it, but, like, I already run good routes. I already make good catches. I'm already fast and explosive. Like, I just got to kind of keep rolling as I'm doing, and I'll be just fine. But Rome might be here and say, man, I thought I was really good, but holy crap. Keenan Allen and DJ Moore are really good. I'm good. Those guys are really good. And if I want to be really good like those guys, I got to do even more than I thought I needed to do. And that means calling out plays, running to my spot, and running those routes as part of it. I mean, just little things like that that's kind of sound small, but over the course of an offseason, a summer, a training camp, like, that's how you learn the playbook faster. That's how you stay in game shape quicker. That's how you get closer to their speed of being ready and able and willing to go. And then add on top of that, going up against Jalen Johnson's guarding you, and he's not giving you an inch of space, and he's getting in your face, talking in your face. This defense has been talking all throughout OTAs and minicamp, talking trash, saying, hey, you're not going to run a route on me. You're not getting a first down, rookie. Like, no, like, and to be able to have to, like, be tested against that every day. Like, because again, you compare it to, like, if you were, if you were a receiver drafted to another team that, say, didn't have very good corners. And I can't tell you off the top of my head, I don't know the Giants cornerback situation well enough. They drafted one a couple years ago. But you know what I mean? You go to a team that doesn't have very good corners, and you're a good young top wide receiver. It's like, oh, well, I'm beating these corners pretty well. Like, okay, like, I've got it. Like, again, I'm still going to work on my craft. I'm not mailing it in, but, like, all right, I'm pretty good. Like, I can handle myself against these guys, as opposed to maybe Rome Odunze in Chicago says, holy crap, Jalen Johnson is really good. I didn't have trouble getting open against college corners, but, like, this is another level. And okay, now I got to push myself that much farther, right? Like, that's where having so much other talent around them at these positions is that much more beneficial, right? It's not that they wouldn't be trying hard or working hard or pushing themselves if there weren't other good wide receivers or DBs on the team, but having that, like, actually in front of them will be more difficult than almost anything they face on their schedule. You know what I mean? A lot of teams they're going to play are not going to have corners as good as Jalen Johnson. Maybe most teams, if not every team. And on the other end, like, Bears aren't going to face that many wide receivers better than DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. Certainly some, like Justin Jefferson, etc. But, like, there's going to be a lot of games this season where the opponent on the other side is not as good as the player that the Bears practice against. And that's going to be really valuable to get those reps in now, so you're that much more prepared when the regular season comes around. It's all about, especially for this offense, getting guys on the same page, getting everybody up to speed in this offense. The defense is already locked in and dialed in and really connected well. But for the offense, it's a brand new offense for everybody, plus a new veteran receiver and a new rookie receiver. So we'll hear from that veteran receiver, Keenan Allen, about how they're building that chemistry and trying to get everyone on the same page and why that matters. Not just quarterback to wide receiver connection, but wide receiver to wide receiver chemistry and having receivers be on the same page. That's next on Locked On Bears. Don't forget, the Locked On Podcast Network has you covered 24 hours a day, even beyond Locked On Bears. If you want to check out our Locked On Sports Today 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the argument, screaming back and forth you get on some of the ESPN and Fox Sports shows. It's the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news you need, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's Locked On Sports Today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And every day, this Bears wide receiving core is getting a little bit better, getting a little bit closer, getting a little bit more on the same page. That, yes, getting on the same page with Caleb Williams and the quarterbacks, throwing to them is perhaps most critical. But there's a certain amount of chemistry that's required between receivers, guys being able to know each other, not just as human beings, but also, like, how they play, how they run their routes, what the different responsibilities are among them, and what they can kind of count on each other to do on any given play. And that not everything always goes exactly according to plan. And when you have that chemistry and have receivers on the same page, when things are off or you have to adjust something on the fly and don't necessarily have time in that moment to gather up, talk, discuss work through it, and then resume the game or resume the play. Like having that connection built now, some of that nonverbal communication and just understanding of each other and the offense goes a long way. And it's one of those things that can be hard to kind of quantify and wrap our heads around a little bit, but I did think Keenan Allen illustrated this well with an early example of something that didn't go right for this team, but then they kind of found a way to, we're going to make it work on the fly, and I think it translates pretty directly to things we might see in the regular season.
How important is it for you and DJ to build that chemistry? I know we talked about the chemistry with the quarterback, but the chemistry with y'all running routes and the nonverbals, and it's kind of in the middle of the play, kind of freestyling. How important is it to get that chemistry, and what's that process like?
I think it's big, because on certain plays we're able to, I can go to his spot, he can go to my spot, and we're able to make the play right, wherever we're at. So like today, we got a formation and nobody was kind of in the right spot, but we all ran the play. As long as we can communicate on that level and get there fast and make the defense have to speed up and, show us the look, and I think it makes it easier on the quarterback.
So it might seem simple enough that, okay, guys were in the wrong spot, but they figured out what routes they were supposed to run and still made the play work. But I think there's a deeper level to that and a little bit more nuance to it that might not, jump out at you right away. But there are so many moments in a game when receivers have, say, like an option route, right, where the play is called and the receiver's route will change based on what the coverage is and what the defense is doing or how they're reading the opposing defense. And that, okay, if they have one deep safety, you might run this. If they have two deep safeties, they might run this. Or if they're in man coverage, you might run this versus different zone coverages, you might run this. And sometimes receivers are playing off of each other a little bit in that regard. And so if I'm Keenan Allen in the slot and I'm looking to DJ Moore on the outside and we're saying, okay, or even their release on the line of scrimmage, right? There's a lot of different examples of this, and say, okay, the slot cornerback has just walked up to me like he's trying to jam me at the line of scrimmage. And so we can be lined up on the play waiting for Caleb to call the snap. We got 5 seconds maybe. We don't have time to talk and say, okay, the slot cornerback stepped up and your cornerback's off. So let's do a switch release where you release really far inside and I'm going to release kind of outside, and we'll kind of end up crossing paths here. And then maybe if the cornerbacks have a call off of that, this thing called banjo coverage, where if a receiver crosses to the outside, like you let him go and you pick up somebody else, where it's still man coverage, but you kind of pass it off. And like the receivers then being able to non-verbally communicate through that and say, okay, this guy's here, your guy's there. That means we're going to do this, like without saying that out loud, but kind of looking at each other and maybe nodding or moving. I can't even really move a hand signal because you don't want to get a false start, but just like the little things. Being able to pick up on the nuances of that because they've practiced the plays together so many times and they know what everyone else's role on that play is going to be and how if that's DJ Moore next to me, he's going to run it a certain way. If that's Rome Odunze next to me, he's going to run it a certain way. And that the adjustment I might make as Keenan Allen or whoever in the slot there, the adjustment might be different depending on which receiver is next to me. And so being able to build that chemistry now, all within, by the way, like a brand new offense too. It's understanding new plays, new terminology, and then also new teammates and new players there. Like that's the real value of that chemistry there that the defensive backs already have and are already ahead of the Bears with. And so like they can challenge these receivers in different ways and force that communication to happen. Because if the DBs were still trying to figure out, okay, how do we handle banjo coverage calls? Like, okay, when we're in cover 3 and I'm up and you're back, how do we handle this? Like, they might keep things a little bit more simple and a little bit more basic and kind of work through the more fundamental things first and then get to the more advanced. But as this defense has been able to come out advanced from the get-go, it has then challenged these receivers to have to do that communication now. Like, if the defense had been keeping it more vanilla because they were still trying to get to the foundations, then maybe they wouldn't put the receivers in as many positions where they would have to know each other's chemistry and communicate through those things and get those experienced reps now, as opposed to experiencing them more during the regular season not for the first time, but like, right, not getting as many of those reps under their belt before the regular season. Like now they'll have already had so much opportunity to work on this because they've been against that at practice with a defensive back group that's already dialed in on that. Plus you have such veteran experienced receivers in Moore and Keenan Allen that experience and that their ability to communicate and recognize all these different things can spread quickly to the younger players farther down the wide receiver depth chart. So that's where having that chemistry is important, and having great players going up against each other on both sides of the ball at receiver and DB is that much more important. Because at rookie minicamp certainly, and then OTAs and now mandatory minicamp. Like they're still not in full pads. They're still not full contact. So you don't get as much of that, head-to-head pushing each other growth and progress in the trenches, right? You get some of that. There's some, pass rush moves you can kind of work on and some footwork stuff. Like there's a little bit of that, but you don't get as much of that clash of the titans kind of like your best pass rusher going against your best offensive lineman and it's making each other better as a result of that because they're just not really able to fully go. And I suppose without pads, the corners and DBs aren't going to be quite as physical against the wide receivers, but it's a lot closer to what you're going to get at training camp in the preseason and regular season with the skill positions on both sides of the ball, as opposed to the guys in the trenches that are imitating it and doing the best they can, but it's just not quite the same. Like it's going to be training camp when Montez Sweat is going to try and make Braxton Jones better, and Tevin Jenkins is going to make Jervon Dexter better, and et cetera, et cetera. Those guys going back and forth. That's where a lot of that pushing starts to happen a little bit more when it's a little bit more like real football with real pads and real contact that these players can start doing at that point. Certainly, we'll try and pay a little closer attention to the trenches in training camp because we haven't been able to as much at OTAs here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So when we get to training camp and we break those down for you, make sure then you're subscribed to Locked On Bears so you're keeping up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis between now and training camp. We slow down a little bit here during the slow months. We're not going to be a full 5 days a week until we get a little bit closer to training camp, but we're still breaking down every kind of Bears update we get throughout this process. We just talked about the Mercedes Lewis signing on yesterday's podcast, Caleb Williams' progress. Go back and take a listen to that if you have not already. Really appreciate you making Locked On Bears your first listen today and hopefully each and every day. If you're looking for your second listen, I was a guest on Locked On Lions today with Matt Deary, talking about the Bears offseason and how that applies for Detroit and where the Bears and the Lions stack up if you want to get behind the scenes or behind the enemy lines a little bit with Deary from Locked On Lions. Or there's always the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 live stream on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. However you do it, I appreciate you making the Locked On Podcast Network a part of your listening habit. And I hope that every time you tune into Locked On Bears, I'm always able to leave you with another opportunity to bear down.